At 6:30 a.m. on August 27th, at the African Development Summit in Addis Ababa, before hundreds of international journalists and dozens of world leaders, Ibrahim Traoré made a move almost unheard of in modern politics. He delivered a bold public ultimatum to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. No hedging, no diplomatic sugarcoating, only unwavering resolve. Staring directly into the cameras, Traoré declared, "Mr. Netanyahu, you have 48 hours to apologize to Africa or you will no longer be welcome here." It was not a threat of war, but a strike of dignity so blunt and forceful that the conference hall fell silent. Within minutes, clips of the moment spread across the globe, sparking heated debates from Johannesburg to Washington. This was not simply a clash between two leaders. It was about the respect Africa demands and the sovereignty it refuses to surrender. And the spark had not begun with Traoré's speech, it began with a leak. According to multiple diplomatic sources, during a closed-door G7 meeting, Netanyahu allegedly made remarks that African leaders found deeply insulting, particularly aimed at Burkina Faso's president. He was reported to have dismissed them as political opportunists, naive in their criticism of Israel's Gaza campaign. Journalists and diplomats later confirmed the language behind closed doors was even harsher, describing Africa's response as crude and militantly theatrical. Sources also revealed Netanyahu hinted at backing IMF efforts to tighten debt recovery in African nations, a stance that inflamed tensions further. Beyond that, he allegedly floated the idea of a new Western-sponsored alliance under the Great Reconstruction 2030 Pact, a proposal that immediately raised fears of a geopolitical restructuring designed to sideline Africa's interests. When news of the leak broke, outrage erupted across African media and social networks. Headlines dominated the news cycle, and within hours, the hashtag Africa is not your porn was trending, generating millions of shares. Yet while public anger boiled over, Traoré remained silent, a silence that, in hindsight, was deliberate. At the Addis Ababa summit, he finally stepped to the podium with uncheckable resolve. "Mr. Netanyahu, Africa will not be your porn, nor a subject of debt chains or Western-sponsored experiments. This is not a game of alliances, it is a question of dignity. You have 48 hours to apologize, or you will no longer be welcome on this continent, not in trade, not in diplomacy, not in the future of history." The room froze, journalists stopped mid-keystroke. Delegates looked at one another in disbelief. This was not a threat of violence, but a direct challenge to the imbalance of power that had defined Africa's relationship with the West for decades. In that moment, Burkina Faso was no longer just a small nation in West Africa, it had become the voice of an entire continent. It became the epicenter of a global conversation about respect, sovereignty, and the future of African diplomacy. The 72-hour countdown began the moment Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the podium, and almost instantly, the world reacted. Social media exploded across the continent and beyond. On African news, the story dominated the front page. The hashtag Africa is not your porn trended globally on X, TikTok, and Facebook, amassing millions of views within the first 24 hours. But the reactions weren't confined to the internet. From government offices to university campuses, Traoré's words were repeated, dissected, and celebrated. For many Africans, this was not simply a diplomatic spat, it was a rare, unfiltered act of defiance against decades of being sidelined in global decision-making. Support poured in quickly. South Africa's foreign minister reposted the viral clip, writing, "Finally, someone said it." The former Kenyan ambassador to the UN added on Twitter, "This is the future of African diplomacy, fearless and incorruptible." These statements showed that Traoré's stand had one broad backing across political and ideological lines. Israel's response, by contrast, was muted. Netanyahu's office issued only a short, vague denial of the leaked remarks, avoiding any direct reply to Traoré's ultimatum. Instead of calming tensions, this silence deepened them, Analysts on Africa News argued it confirmed what many Africans had long felt, that their concerns are too often brushed aside rather than addressed with seriousness. Within 24 hours, the story had grown beyond a headline. It had become a rallying cry that united citizens, diplomats, and commentators. For the first time in years, African unity was not just an aspiration, it was visible, urgent, and real. The momentum only grew. Across the continent, people embraced Traoré's ultimatum as both a symbol and a turning point. In Burkina Faso itself, despite over 2 million people displaced by jihadist violence and more than 60% of the country outside direct government control, Traoré was seen as a figure of resistance and hope for unity. Public support for military rule surged under his leadership. A recent Afrobarometer survey showed that 66% of Burkina's citizens now accept military rule, compared to only 24% in 2012. His bold challenge to Israel's prime minister captured the imagination of both youth and rural communities, who increasingly view him as a modern-day Thomas Sankara leader determined to restore dignity and independence not only for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. On the international stage, President Traoré's name quickly became synonymous with open defiance against outside political pressure. Demonstrations in his support erupted not only in Ouagadougou, where thousands chanted "Long live Captain Traoré," but also in cities with large African diaspora communities, such as London and Kingston. Protesters waved Burkina Faso's flag and carried banners demanding an end to foreign interference in African affairs. Inside Africa, commentators noted that Traoré's domestic reforms had given weight to his bold foreign policy. These reforms included nationalizing gold mines, building Burkina Faso's first gold refinery, and distributing tractors to farmers as part of a broader push for self-reliance. Yet the road ahead remained fraught with danger. In the past year alone, more than 7,200 people had died in Burkina Faso's ongoing conflicts, a sharp rise compared to the 2,894 deaths recorded before Traoré took power. International human rights groups also warned that forced conscription, arbitrary arrests, and the suppression of dissent could erode his popularity if he fails to deliver stability and security. Against this tense backdrop, Traoré's 48-hour ultimatum to Netanyahu, who was more than a bold statement, it was part of a broader campaign to redefine African diplomacy on Africa's own terms. For millions, that ticking clock became a symboler demand for respect, dignity, and sovereignty that could reshape the continent's future. The ultimatum spilled beyond diplomatic channels. Within hours, the political and social mood in Burkina Faso and across Africa had shifted dramatically. In Ouagadougou, public squares filled with citizens carrying banners that read, "Africa stands with Ibrahim Traoré and respect Africa." Student unions from Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria issued joint declarations urging the African Union to stand with Burkina Faso, even proposing economic and diplomatic measures against any nation that disrespects African sovereignty. This wave of civic mobilization carried real political weight in countries where citizens are often disengaged from politics due to frustration with their leaders. The incident reignited a rare sense of shared purpose. Commentators across African media noted how it crossed religious, ethnic, and regional divides, with leaders from Christian, Muslim, and secular states all agreeing on one principle: African dignity is non-negotiable. In Burkina Faso, the impact was immediate. President Traoré, already popular for his nationalist message and reforms, saw his approval ratings surge after issuing the ultimatum. Opposition figures, once vocal critics of his military-led government, suddenly grew cautious, fearing their criticism might be seen as unpatriotic. For a brief moment, national unity overshadowed political divisions. Even the African Union, often accused of moving too slowly, began urgent discussions. Insiders reported that several member states were preparing a joint response if Netanyahu failed to apologize within the 48-hour deadline. Still, analysts warned of potential risks if the ultimatum failed to produce tangible results. Public disillusionment could follow. For now, however, the momentum was undeniable, reshaping Africa's political landscape in ways that would be difficult to reverse. Beyond unity, Traoré's ultimatum sparked deeper debates. In several parliaments, lawmakers called for reviews of trade agreements with Israel, insisting that no partnership could continue without mutual respect. Governments in South Africa, Namibia, and Tanzania even floated the idea of a continent-wide reassessment of diplomatic priorities should no apology come. Regional alliances also began to rethink their collective strength. ECOWAS traditionally focused on economics and conflict resolution, opened debates about adopting a stronger foreign policy stance. The message was clear: African nations must stand united not only in trade, but also in matters of dignity and respect on the global stage. Inside Burkina Faso, the societal impact was profound. Communities long divided by conflict found new unity in the symbolism of the president's words. In insurgency-hit villages, local leaders said people now viewed their daily struggles as part of Africa's larger fight for sovereignty. Even displaced families in makeshift camps repeated the ultimatum around cooking fires, turning it into a story of collective pride. But this momentum carried risks.